Good afternoon. My name is Michael Lindsay, and I want to welcome you to a truly new event at Gordon called Conversations with the President. This is an idea for us to get an opportunity to share the stories of some very successful Gordon alums, for them to tell a little bit more of their experience and their background and the process by which God has led them over the course of their life. And we'll be covering the material in a question-answer format. I'll ask the questions in the beginning, but then we're going to invite you to ask the questions. And what we'd like to do is try and be as technologically savvy as possible. So on the screen, you'll notice that there'll be instructions of an email address or a number that you can text your questions to, which will come to my iPad. So I'll encourage you to do that. That would be great. We'd love to see how it works. Let me introduce to you our three distinguished panelists. Fran Brown down here on the end, graduated from Gordon in 1985 with a degree in business administration. Fran's talent for numbers was evident even as a Gordon student because he helped us with student government finances as an undergraduate. He additionally holds a master's degree from Bentley University and has served as the president of the Gordon Alumni Board. Fran is a partner in a firm called CCR, which is a public accounting and business advisory firm based in Boston. Accounting Today recently named CCR as one of the top 100 accounting firms in the country. And Fran provides particular leadership for the Assurance Services Department and the not-for-profit group, which is terrific. Fran has over 25 years' experience working with not-for-profit groups, providing consulting and advice on tax and audit issues. He's worked with a number of top-tier institutions, including Greater Boston Food Bank, the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy, Boston Trinity Academy, and Grace Chapel. Fran and his high school sweetheart, Teresa, have 4 kids. They live in Malden, where Fran serves on the board of the Malden YMCA and is treasurer for the Mystic Valley Regional Charter School. They attend church at 7 Mile Road. His 2 youngest kids, Bobby and Leah, are current students at Gordon. Please join me in welcoming Fran Brown. Ted Mallett graduated from Gordon in 1974 with a degree in political science. He went on to earn a PhD in political economy from the University of Toronto. Ted has led a varied career in lots of different ventures. And if I had to say one phrase to describe who Ted is, he's an intellectual entrepreneur. Ted, his work has been quite varied. He served in an ambassadorial role for the United Nations during the Cold War, been involved with public policy on the U.S. Senate and the State Department. And in 1992, he presided over CNN's World Economic Development Congress. On the business side, Ted has consulted with Wharton Chase Econometrics and has worked in the capital markets for Solomon Brothers. Today, Ted acts as the chairman and CEO of Global Fiduciary Governance, which is a global strategy and thought leadership company that helps organizations who are trying to conceptualize projects on a global scale. He's the author of numerous books, articles, and corporate reports. Among them is a best-selling book called Doing Virtuous Business, which actually was the inspiration for a PBS documentary of the same title, which opened this past May to 15 million viewers and was nominated for an Emmy. Ted has served on the executive board of the World Economic Forum, which hosts the world-renowned Davos meeting in Switzerland every year. In 2005, Ted founded the Spiritual Enterprise Institute, which he chairs as a research professor at Yale. Ted loves traveling, a hobby that he picked up as a Gordon student, where he was a participant on the European seminar. He's traveled to 135 different countries, both as a diplomat and in business. He and his wife, Beth Ellen, live in Madison, Connecticut. They have 4 kids and are active in the Episcopal Church. Please join me in welcoming Ted Mallett. Carrie Tibbles graduated from Gordon in 1993 with a degree in biology and psychology. While at Gordon, she was an A.J. Gordon Scholar, serving as the academic affairs representative for what we call the GCSA, which is the Gordon College Student Association. She played for 4 years on the women's basketball team, and in her senior year, she was one of 5 women basketball players in the country to receive the NCAA Scholar Athlete Award. While at Gordon, Carrie was in the Kenneth Pike Scholars Program and received the James Forrester Award upon graduation. She attended medical school at Boston University and completed residency training in Minneapolis. Following her residency, she completed a medical education fellowship at Harvard. In 2001, Carrie joined the emergency medicine faculty at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, where she's currently the director of graduate medical education and the associate director of the Harvard-affiliated emergency medicine residency program. And she worked an all-nighter last night. Carrie is currently the principal investigator on the first multi-center trial of teamwork training in 7 Harvard hospitals, which was recently featured in the Wall Street Journal. Carrie and her husband, Michael, also a Gordon College graduate. They live in Lexington, Massachusetts, with their 3 boys, Joseph, Matthew, and Benjamin, where they attend Grace Chapel. Please join me in welcoming Carrie Tibbles. So as you can tell, we have a terrific group of folks who have great stories and great experiences. And what I'd like to ask each of you, if you wouldn't mind starting us off, by sharing with us one element of your Gordon experience that you think was helpful or very important to your later professional development. Something that started here on campus that later blossomed into something that's brought you to the place where you are today. Carrie, can we maybe start with you?
Sure. As you mentioned, I played on the basketball team. And while academics, it was an incredibly important part of my journey, I think one of the things that really formed me the most was on the athletic field of learning things about communication, learning things about teamwork and hard work. As a lot of you know when you pick up the newspaper today, healthcare is broken. We are very technologically savvy, we have very advanced science and very advanced medicine. But most of the time when we make mistakes, it's because we aren't communicating well and we're not working together as a team. You know, and just this week I was speaking to a room of about 200 healthcare executives and engineers and presenting them with what can be done in your hospital when you actually listen to the ideas of people doing frontline work and what can happen if you improve communication systems. A lot of that happened here with the leadership skills I developed as one of the co-captains of the basketball team and just sort of one of those things. And it's funny how things that seem so basic can get lost sometimes in complicated systems. So I often draw back on that experience when I'm speaking to groups about teamwork and about communication and collaboration. And a lot of that started here.
Fran, how about you?
I would say for me, it was one of my professors. Ted Wood was an accounting professor here for many, many years. When I first came to Gordon, I was actually a philosophy major. I took an accounting course, really enjoyed it, which Ted found interesting, so he took me under his wing. And Ted and I developed a great relationship. He convinced me to become a business administration major, and he helped me get an internship in a CPA firm. And then throughout my career after graduation, Ted and I stayed in contact. Ted served on a number of boards in Boston that I worked with him on. And I did a lot of recruiting of Gordon students. And so when I look back, having that professor who really took notice of this philosophy major student who seemed probably lost at the time, he really invested a lot of his time in me. And it's a relationship that we've been able to maintain right to this day. So I would say definitely the professor.
Great. Ted, how about you?
So I wanted to say, because I haven't seen you since the inauguration, my first reaction when I heard Michael was coming to Gordon was, oh my God, you know that. And I'm really pleased, and now I say thanks be to God that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because I think you're a great young leader for this place.
Thank you.
The word that sums up what I would suggest as the leading ingredient, at least in my life that I take away from Gordon, is a German one, Weltanschauung. So you have to look that up.
Yeah, well, you.
So
I took Latin, not German. Yeah.
Because when we move, we get
Yeah, that's
static.
right.
So we'll be static here. That means world and life view. And the world and life view that was integrated here at Gordon, and I hope still is, across disciplines that integrated faith and learning has stayed with me and carried me throughout the varied career that I'd had, and certainly in the writing I do presently, in the motion pictures that I've made 4 for PBS, and certainly in my research at Yale presently.
Ted, I'm curious, everybody grows up with what we might call an expected life story. It's rarely articulated, but as a kid we figure it out from our parents, from our community. It's the life we're supposed to lead, maybe what we're supposed to do, but more likely who we're supposed to become. As you look back on your life story, what was that you picked up as a kid that you were supposed to do? And was there something in your formative years that you think really shaped your horizons to what you have done professionally?
Well, I was going to say my brother was here the other day for the inauguration. My mother wanted him to be an undertaker, so fortunately that wasn't my calling. I think that this notion of vocation is very important, if that's what you're getting to. I think that as persons of faith, we have to have that ear, not only to the ground, but to the Lord, and asking, what are we called to do, and where are our hearts? And hopefully, where do our minds and hearts come together so that we can have energy? From the very earliest age, my name is Theodore Roosevelt Malik, I was brought up in a political milieu. So I had politics in my veins. I wanted to study law, I wanted to study politics, I wanted to be in the arena. So in that sense, I've had a life in the arena, and in different corners of it, but one of activity.
Fran, how about you?
I would say for myself, when I look back, my parents were public school teachers and were very active in their community. And that's something that they really impressed upon their children, was for us to be active in the community, to be really giving back at all times. And so that's something that I've taken to heart, and I came back and did some part-time teaching here at Gordon over the years, and I sit on 4 boards all in Malden. My wife and I haven't left where we grew up yet. So it's really, to me, learning that calling of service and really giving back. That's something that was impressed upon me early.
Carrie, how about you, an expected life story?
I have a story very similar to Fran's. My parents were also active public school teachers in my small town. And I grew up and just watched the cycle over the years of the new students coming in and their accomplishment as students would go on. And that process I knew I wanted to make a part of my life. And growing up in rural Maine, we're very practical people. And my mom said, please go to college and know how to do something when you get out. And so I think that was a little bit of the practical hands-on part that drew me to biology and psychology. And looking back now, it all really fits.
Huh.
Yeah.
How about if you had to identify somebody aside from a family member when you were growing up that had a particularly formative influence? Who would that have been?
That would have been, let me think about that a little bit. I think that would have been my high school basketball coach. And I think for people that invest in kids and spend time coaching and spend time, it is a critical thing, because there's certain things that happen during those years that maybe you don't share as much with your parents, but you need another person who sort of believes in you, draws out your best, pushes you to get better. And while it plays out on the athletic field, I think more importantly it plays out in who you become and your character and that sort of thing.
Ted, how about you?
Well, I've been fortunate to have many mentors throughout my career, and particularly in formative stages. So this idea of mentoring, I'm very keen on, because sometimes you're shaping people when you're not even knowing it, but if you're doing it consciously, that can have a very, very, very long impact. So I had 2 social study teachers in high schools. One was liberal, one was conservative. They debated with me. I came out somewhere in the middle, I guess. But the people that I've had a chance to really mentor me, both at Gordon, where there were many people, I still remember them. I just saw some of them in faculty reunions. They're all retired now. And in graduate school, we just had a conversation about Alan Bloom. And people like that, I mean, really great minds, in my case, who I had the chance to study with.
Fran?
I would say for myself, it was probably my family.
If you had to see somebody outside of family.
Outside of family.
Yeah.
That's going to be tough. I would say for myself, it was probably a few teachers in high school that really had taken an interest. Being the youngest of 5, I didn't get a lot of attention. I was probably that quiet child after the other 4 had gone through, because we were right in a row. So a few teachers did step up, took an interest in me, helped me kind of figure out where I wanted to go, things that I needed to do, decisions to be made, and they helped guide me along that process.
Fran, what about one of the things that is intriguing to me? So we have medicine and science, public policy, and business represented by these different lives. When I study successful leaders, one of the things that strikes me is that somewhere early in their career, let's say first 5 to 10 years, something happens. An opportunity comes their way, a mentor perhaps takes an interest in them, or they get a lucky break. But something happens significant that takes the trajectory of their life, which was going, let's say, at 45 degrees, and now it's going at 85 degrees. I'm wondering if there's something that you can point back to that happened somewhere between graduating from Gordon and 10 years into your career that you think made a real difference in the angle of your trajectory.
Sure. When I was first starting out in the CPA firm, you're just kind of thrown into the mixture at a pretty low level. And one of the things that I did was I looked around and said, what do I need to do to really make a difference in my firm? And I took an interest, to date myself, in technology. I had this mindset that maybe if we all had computers, it would go a little better. And so I took that interest, and when I positioned myself as someone who was willing to take some risks within a firm, and when you talk about CPAs and risk, those really go hand in hand. So as a young CPA, fairly green and still learning my way, but to take risk and to really put myself out there, that was what probably promoted me to be advanced throughout the firm.
Ted, how about you?
Well, I think that one of the critical junctures in my life was in 1987, early 1988. I was unhappy on Wall Street, although making money, and I got a call from my old friends at the State Department telling me I'd been nominated to take this ambassadorial role as the top American in the UN in Geneva, Switzerland, which surprised me, but I was pleased to hear it. I didn't think it would happen. I was 35 years old. So that was the meteoric rise for me. And having been actually chosen then by the White House to do that led to a whole lot of other things. So that's God's hand actually pretty demonstrably in my life.
How did you make those connections with the people who ended up tapping you for that role?
Well, I'd been at the State Department, first as a scholar diplomat and as an academic, and then I worked as a political appointee. I was on George Shultz's staff. And then I worked in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, so I had senatorial support. You know how politics works.
Right.
I would also say that I was the only Gordon graduate interviewed for your book, which is a very good book, Faith in the Halls of Power.
Well, thank you, my friend. Good promotion work. I appreciate that.
Had to
Ted.
get that in there.
Yes, I appreciate that. On sale now at the bookstore. Carrie, how about you?
When I think about sort of where things changed, and Gordon had really set a foundation for me. For me, I had sort of had this mindset, you love people, you want long-term relationships with your patients, you're heading in this direction. I was sure I was going to be a pediatrician, but I wasn't quite happy. And then someone sort of suggested to me, think about it a little bit differently. Think about you're going to have very, very quick relationships in the emergency department, but you're the right person for that. Give that a try. And so I rethought the whole thing. And I entered into a specialty that's a young specialty. It still had room for young physicians to really take a leadership role right away. I then got in there and developed an interest that nobody else had, but I thought was needed, and really started looking at how do we take care of pregnant women when they come in, and what do we have to do to keep both of them safe. Everyone's like, and what I would find is my lectures would be filled with hundreds of people going, I hope that never happens to me. Thank you for looking into that. And you realize you got to go with something you love and believe in, even if nobody else is kind of that interested, and that's kind of what happened. And then the Harvard malpractice carrier heard about some of my work and invited me to work for them. And I think it was taking a risk, stepping back, rethinking things a little bit, and then you can create something unique, particularly if it's something you're passionate about.
I want to invite you, if you're curious about asking a question of our panelists, go ahead and send something in. I've got a couple of questions that have come, but I want to encourage you. And also, if you'd like to fill out a question, you can pass those down to this way, and we'll make sure to get those collected. So if you've got a question, go ahead and fill it out. One of the things that has come through is a question about role models. If you could choose one person who had been a role model, not necessarily a mentor, somebody maybe you didn't know as well, but that is out there in the public space that you think was inspirational or particularly important in your own journey, who was that and why? Ted?
Well, Michael, no, I was going to say Michael Jordan because I can't dunk, but I don't know, most of my role models growing up were politicians and political leaders of different stripes. I mean, my father took my brother and I to the Philadelphia, I grew up in Philadelphia, so I'm disappointed today. He took us to the public library every week as really young kids and forced us to read 4 books by the next week. Most of them were biographies. So my role model, in many ways, for doing that and actually for being a great father is my own father.
Wow, that's terrific. Fran, how about you?
As far as a role model, for myself, it was really, when I look back, I had a few people that I can identify where they stayed in areas that were depressed. And so I look back, and that was something that my wife and I, Malden is a very urban, somewhat depressed community. And early in our career, we had made that decision that we were going to stay there, raise our kids in a very diverse, it's economically diverse, it's racially diverse city, and really try to avoid running away from where the need is. And I look back, and there were people that showed me how to do that. And so that became very critical. And so now that we're there and we see the incredible change around us in our community, and it's great because we're part of some of the solution to the problems, sitting on numerous boards where, and a couple of them are foundations where we give money out to charities in the city, and being on one of the largest school boards in the city. So it's really been nice to stay put and realize from some people, it's funny, Ted and I just for a second chatted beforehand, we're kind of at very opposite ends of the spectrum. For every country he's visited, I haven't heard of. So it's, I stayed put. I stayed in a city, and I'm trying to make a difference there locally.
I would say for me, and it's not meant as an infomercial, but it's actually very true. There were 2 women professors here, Kay Cook in the psychology department and Jane Andrus in the biology department, who answered what I think is one of the most critical questions for women, and I think Rebecca's panel got at it today, is there's a lot of us who have something we're very passionate about, maybe love academic life, love thought life, but also want to be godly moms and wives. And there's not a lot of people there's not a clear roadmap about how to do that, but I firmly believe that God is a creative God, and he wants women to make unique differences and as well as being good moms at the same time. And I think they were 2 women who did that very well, and as a student studying under them would share things about their families and ideas of what they had done raising their own kids, and yet I really respected who they were as academic leaders as well. And that was really formative, and as I visit campus now, that same question is here 20 years later that I had when I was a student.
One of the questions that's come in is, we've got a number of students that are actually in the audience, and they're curious about what could they do during their 4 years at Gordon that might help them to one day sit in one of these chairs. So is there something that they could do that you think would make a real difference? And I'm going to take the presidential privilege and answer that for myself, and then invite the rest of you to offer your thoughts. I think there are 2 things that make a significant difference in the likelihood of someone having a meteoric career. You can't predict these sorts of things. The Lord works in different ways, and we wouldn't want to try and spend our life trying to pursue success. But there are common elements that I think everyone who has an extraordinary experience do. 2 of them that I'd say are really important. One is the importance of having a global understanding of the world. That's increasingly important. And so I really encourage our students to spend at least a season of their time as an undergraduate abroad, because I think it'll change you in significant ways. And the second thing is that I think it makes a very significant difference for Gordon graduates to spend a portion of their early career years in a global city, whether that be in the US, in a place like New York or Los Angeles, or abroad. And the reason is because global cities are where things are happening. We are a culture, we are a world that's dominated by large institutions, and those large institutions are headquartered in major cities. And therefore, it's significant to get exposure to those kinds of institutions and to have that kind of experience. So spending a portion of your time abroad and being ready to move to a global city, I think makes a significant difference. But I'd love to hear what other folks think that could make a difference during their time at Gordon? Fran?
I think the other thing is use the time to find out what you like to do. What I didn't mention before being a philosophy major was spent a year at Boston College as a pre-med student. I traveled the world in my college years, but I tried a little of everything. And the important thing is find that area that you're passionate about, that you can get excited about, that when it's time to do some studies and homework and reading, that you enjoy doing that. And then also, I worked with a few different on-campus ministries, and that enabled me to find out which ones I enjoyed, what aspect of working with a ministry. I mean, one of the things that you find out is working with a ministry isn't just the people that go out and do some of the work. There's a lot of work done behind the scenes. I found out that I'm somewhat better at doing some of that work behind the scenes. And I think this is a great opportunity to find out. Gordon has many different missions organizations on campus where you can apply different skills and really start to see where your passions are and where your talents are.
Well, I would certainly agree with you about globalization because that's been, my thread throughout my entire career. I would, however, say this chair in particular could be endowed for, I don't know, what is the price these days?
$5 million.
There you go. But my real answer to that question is actually Max Weber's answer to that question. Famous sociologist, father of sociology, and that is practice the Protestant work ethic because it's almost vanished from the present world.
Say more.
Say more? That's a long conversation. I think that we're in a malaise presently where people have no rudder, where students are, easily led or misled, where people don't work very hard anymore, and people who do have virtues and that come out of settings like this, who practice them and who work hard, are distinguished from the get-go.
Carrie?
I think kind of following up on that, what I see is you really have to examine your life, figure out what you love, leave space to do that. But then I think one of the biggest enemies can be distraction. In my world, you can be interrupted 52 times within an hour as you're taking care of patients. But what I find sometimes, though, is time seems unlimited when you're in college, but it really isn't. And if you're burning it on stuff that you don't care about or that you're not passionate about or just because someone else thinks it's a good idea, it's too valuable time. You've got to pull it back to what you're passionate about. But at the same time, as certainly true in my own life, you've got to leave your mind open of maybe there's something else God has for me too, and be open to that. So you have to hold those two things in tension. You can't be distracted by things that are urgent but not important, but yet you also have to be open if God wants to stretch you and take you somewhere else.
How about, how do you think the liberal arts education you received at Gordon prepared you for the broad range of experiences that you've had after Gordon?
I'll tell you, for me, medicine is not as much about the science as it is about the ethical questions, the financial questions, the sociology questions about like who's coming in, what my students, their background. My ability to write has just been just as important as my ability to design and experiment. And I think to function in the world of academic medicine where you're trying to sort of shape what the next generation of doctors is going to look like, you need to draw back on all of those experiences. And particularly for me, I still find myself going back to Bible classes, philosophy classes, and a lot of that integrates into how I think about not just what I'm doing on a daily basis, but what I think graduate medical education is going to look like in the next 10 to 20 years because it's changing rapidly.
One of the things that we're trying to focus on this year in the inaugural year is a theme called Inspiring the Next Generation, Faithful Leadership for the Common Good. And one of the things that is a tension point that I would say probably in all of your lives and probably in many of our lives is the tension between pursuing professional success and spiritual faithfulness. Now, obviously, those two can work mutually enriching with one another, but at the same time, they can work in opposite directions, that there are challenges that you face in navigating that area. I wonder if each of our panelists might tell me about a way in which you feel like your professional success may have cost you something personally? Fran?
No one wants to touch that one.
Yeah. Notice I said how, not if.
Well, I think for myself, you become in a CPA firm, there's a tremendous amount of pressure to rise to the top, to become a partner. And there becomes a point in your career early on where you might be identified as someone who has that potential. And then the tension becomes, boy, they've identified me. Now, what am I willing to risk to achieve that? And so one of the things I think for myself, when I look back, I spent a lot of time working early in my career. I felt that I could probably outwork anyone. My wife was home with 4 kids, 4 and under, and I felt I had this tension of, if I'm not at the office, someone else is, and I didn't want that. So when I look back, that's probably one of the things that I allowed to kind of seep in. And when you're spending that much time professionally working and really trying to achieve a goal, something has to give. And so you aren't home as much as you want to be. You don't perhaps make every game. And certainly you can't go to every church event that's going on.
Ted, how about you?
Yeah, so economists have this term called trade-offs, and you're constantly making those trade-offs. And some of them are sacrificial, some of them are easy, but you're conscious. We live in a world of tension. Christ is in culture, that is a tension. So there are lots of points in my career where that tension came to the forefront. When I was doing my PhD, I had a famous Platonist on my committee who said, "I suffered, you will suffer. And if you don't agree with me, you may not even get your PhD." So it happens actually at every nook and cranny. On Wall Street, when I was on Wall Street, people got they still get these humongous bonuses at the end of the year. And I made a declaration on the trading floor of Salomon Brothers that I was giving a large portion of my bonus to charity. That was not a wise thing to do. They didn't like that idea. You're supposed to buy a Ferrari, 12 more Rolexes. So there's always these tensions. Most of them, I think, have to do with the material world.
Carrie?
And I would say for me, the biggest trade-off I had to be careful about was time. When you're training in medicine, I had a period of time where I was in a neurosurgical rotation. I hadn't had a day off in 11 weeks. Started kind of getting sick every morning. Turns out by the end I was 13 weeks pregnant, hadn't stopped long enough to figure it out. And my mom's like, "Really? What did they teach you in medical school? You didn't notice? You didn't notice you were pregnant?" And that tension over time, because there's a lot of voices pulling you and saying what you can do, the work you can do. And I had to be really careful and pull some people in my life who can remind me to make sure that I balance that, because you really can't be replaced in your family, and I think for women that is so challenging. And recognizing it, what's very interesting is I started saying no to the less important things and focusing just at work on what I truly cared about. The quality of my work actually got better. Which is interesting, because I was actually doing what I really cared about, but saying, what, it's time for me to invest here. I wish I can say over the last 10 years I've done it perfectly. I haven't. There's definitely been warning signs, but thankfully I think God has been gracious, and He's put people in my life who can remind me of that and pull me back. And I think it's a daily decision that you make in terms of how are you going to do only the work. And I have to start my day basically start my day with a prayer every day. God, let me do today only what you wanted me to do, nothing more, nothing less. And pretty much I've had to do that, because I think that's the cost. It's the trade-offs that Ted was talking about.
Has ambition been a virtue or a vice in your life?
I would say in general, it has been a virtue. And that comes from, when you spend your days in an emergency department, you watch people at the end. And if you're going to die well, you needed to have lived well. You need things to matter. Now, most of the time, I'll tell you, that's not solving all the world's problems. It's loving the people who bring you all the problems. And I think most of the time it's who you become, not what you do. But out of what you become, it becomes what you do. I think as I told the students yesterday, I almost didn't have enough confidence to go out for the basketball team. I graduated as one of the 5 scholar athletes in the country. I needed that ambition brought me somewhere that otherwise, had I not tried, I never would have succeeded.
I love what you said. Say it again. You're trying not to solve the problem. What did
Yeah.
you say?
I said, I think in the world, especially like if you're, working with residents and students, they have lots of things they can complain about all day. You can't solve all the world's problems. They're gonna continue to come year after year, but you can love problem bearers, the people who every day are at your door with problems. You can love them. I actually read it. I didn't make it up. I read it in Richard Swenson's book about Search of Balance. I read it last week, but I think it's really important and it's kind of sticking with me. You have to love problem bearers. You can't solve all problems.
That's great. Ted, would you say that that ambition has been a virtue or a vice in your life?
So you know that I'm a virtue ethicist, on which side I would come
I chose
down.
that word carefully.
No. And I'm writing a new book on economic vice, so I know that there are great temptations as well that can lead to our personal and our collective demise. I would say you have to be careful with ambition. It's a two-headed snake. On the one side, it presents opportunities, and you have to seize those opportunities. Even God presents you with multiple opportunities, and you're in disbelief about, what you're challenged to do. On the other side, you can have blind ambition. It's a possibility.
Fran?
I would say ambition for me has been a virtue. It's been something where when I've been able to see what I wanted to accomplish and how I can accomplish that and carry out God's will in my life, my family's life, and my community by being in a position of leadership within my firm, leadership within my community. I'm able to accomplish a lot more that way. And if I didn't have kind of a desire to achieve those goals, I wouldn't be able to accomplish as much.
I always like it that when I learned that in the New Testament, there's a phrase of holy ambition, which suggests to me that ambition in and of itself is not good or bad, but it's the way in which it's used. And I think two-headed snake is probably a helpful metaphor for us. How about, I'm curious about the various characters in the Bible, or perhaps passages in the Bible or verses of the Bible that have been especially important to you in your own professional journey. I wonder if you'd be willing to share one of those with us. Fran?
I think for myself, I can't think of any particular verse off the top of my head that really has been kind of a verse that I've used forever. Really, what I've looked at is I really take heart to the Bible teaching us to really love our neighbor. My wife and I, we were, matter of fact, just the other day, we're kind of joking, last night, joking about our neighborhood, how diverse it is. And it's really, as that diversity has come upon us in our neighborhood, we've been there 20 years, I'm watching it change. Really loving our neighbor has taken on a new meaning. Our church is really taking that as its approach this coming year, and how we can get out into our community and be missional to our neighbors who might never have heard of Jesus and have never been to church. And so I guess that's the one, is to love thy neighbor.
Ted?
So I read the Psalms very closely, and my favorite psalm is Psalm 121, which was my father's favorite psalm, so therefore I inherited it. And it's about the Lord looking and watching over us and keeping us, in his constant care. So we have to be conscious of that. And also reading, New Testament verses. I'm not going to only focus on the Psalms, but I've written recently about this idea of spiritual capital. So in all religious traditions, and I'm interested in actually all the great religious traditions, you have this idea of a reservoir, sometimes from revealed words, sometimes from practical wisdom. And if we can take that with us into the world, it serves as great strength.
For me, it's in the 4th chapter of Esther where Mordecai is talking to her and she's not really sure what she's going to do. And he says, perhaps you're here for such a time as this. And I think about that verse a lot. I mentioned it last night. And when I think about the 2 biblical characters that mean the most to me, it's Daniel and Joseph, who they were put in a very specific situation at a specific point in history and asked to do God's work. And if you notice, they're the same person, whether they're in jail or whether things look bleak or whether they're sort of leading the country. They don't really change who they are. Their character doesn't change. And I think about my life, depending on whether I'm home, whether I'm seeing a patient, whatever I'm doing, the moment, I kind of need to still work on developing that character. And who does God want me to be here? And is there something unique about this particular time in Boston, this particular time in academic medicine, this particular time in Lexington, Massachusetts, where I live, that what am I supposed to be doing?
I'm always intrigued. I'm a sociologist, so I'm intrigued with the way in which space and things in space, somebody's home or their office or their car, can reflect on their priorities. I wonder if we were to go and visit your office or your home or your car, is there a way in which we could see that your faith is really important to you? And I'm specifically curious, is there a way in which you try to bring either scripture or an idea of the Christian faith to the forefront of your mind regularly because you have it present somehow? And if so, what is that sort of physical representation of your faith that keeps you grounded? Fran?
Well, I think if you came to my office, you looked at the bookshelf above my desk, it's really kind of a head scratcher because you have the books about business and accounting and tax law, but you also have books on servant leadership. And the Bibles are up there, various versions of it, and various books by great Christian men as to how to be a leader that loves the people that work for them. And so I think it's, on my bookshelf, at least at my office, I've been able to kind of have that combination of taking what God has done in my life and really having it reflect through how I work. And people that visit me in my office, my partners, they understand who I am. They call me Reverend sometimes. So it's, and so, it's one of those where I think if you are very open about your faith and you live by it on a daily basis, it's really not something that should be, kind of work versus your spiritual life balance. It's all one.
And my answer would be I have artwork. So I believe that artwork actually, and what you collect and what you look at says a lot about who you are, what you believe, and what you profess. So in my home, I have this huge painting of Narcissus staring into the pool, which reminds us about humility. In my office, I have a painting of the Tower of Babel, which reminds us, of course, of that biblical story of how we have all these machinations, but we really can't build a tower that will get us to God. And I have another set of paintings that are mostly medieval paintings. One is of woodcuts by Dürer of the four apostles. So I think artwork and what you actually, I'm not talking about icons here, you could call them icons, but what you collect and keep actually says the most.
So when you walk into my office, I'm not sure you'll be that impressed. I have a prayer of St. Francis that lives right above my desk, and then I have years of all the pictures of my residents. Now, I was offered a private office. I have one sort of remote from the ED, but I actually, as you can imagine, in academic medicine, particularly in Brookline, Boston, it's a tight space for offices, and I was offered my own office, but I said, I don't want to be that far away from my residents, and so I invited them, my chief residents, to share my office. So when you come in, you're going to see things set up where my residents have their space. You're going to see a big basket of snacks where I expect my residents to come in and spend time with me, because I realized if I'm going to be an effective leader for them, they need to be present with me. So I kind of redesigned the office, gave them some space. So there's an awful lot of bike pants and different things that end up in there and all their sort of stuff. But it's worth it. And so I think what you'll see is what matters to me, which is the years of my residence and graduation, the 100 or so doctors that now are practicing emergency medicine because they came through my program. And you'll see some snacks and a comfortable chair, and you can come in and talk to me about what you want to do in medicine.
One of the things that I learned over the course of doing my own research on leaders is that if you look at their lives and their biographies, you assume that the path has been straightforward and that the road's been easy. When in fact, if you ask each individual, they oftentimes tell about stumbles or setbacks or challenges they encountered along the way. I wonder if each of our panelists would be willing to share one setback or one stumble that they experienced professionally and how that has shaped who they are. Ted?
It's a harder question because it's a pretty straight line. But, you know, at various points you're trying to get something and you don't get something, you want an appointment to something, or I'm in a very competitive arena of corporate strategy, so you're trying to get a client and somebody else gets that client, and you can get disappointed and you get waylaid, but usually you make it up in spades. So I really think you have to be patient and have a long suffering and a long-term view and not get disappointed by the ins and outs and the dailies up and down.
Fran?
I think for myself, I had a situation where in my firm, we were trying to deal with an underperforming partner. And I didn't really get a lot of support from some other partners. And I felt that that was something that was really holding the firm back as a whole. And so I was very much convinced that I was right on this issue. And so when the other partners kind of vote against what you feel is kind of critical to the future of your firm, that's kind of disappointing. You feel that, okay, perhaps they don't really respect your opinion or value your insight. And so at first I took that as, maybe I need to revisit this and look at how I'm a partner. And what I found out was by doing that, my partners were very much family people. And this other partner had been with them for 20 plus years. And I didn't address the fact that they knew him personally and it was a good friend. And I was looking at it strictly from a numbers standpoint of we need to remove an underperforming person. And so even though it didn't work for me the way I thought it should, it did help me to understand that even in business, when it's a hard decision that does have to be made, we ultimately did remove him, but we're dealing with people. And you have to understand that they are people, they have families, and there's a right way to do that. And so now I try to approach those things from a much different angle and a much different philosophy about what I'm trying to accomplish.
I think when I think about one of the biggest setbacks for me, it happened about 5 years ago. Now, I started in the second year of my program, so we really built the training program, designed the whole curriculum. And when you do that, you really own it. You're very proud of it. And we hadn't realized we were losing some of the we had some really discouraged, we had very low morale in the residents we were leading. And we realized it was kind of a dark time because we thought we had put so much in the program. We thought we were really running the best training program there was. And we had some real morale issues. And it took a lot of humility to sit and figure out why and figure out that we had owned the program so much that we hadn't let people be dissatisfied and say what they needed. And it was a very, very humbling experience, but incredibly important. And I think it helps me step away and realize it's not about owning the program, it's about serving my residents. And I really had to go back to the Bible and realize I had kind of gotten away from that. We had gotten away from just owning the vision of our program and what we thought we had accomplished, and we hadn't allowed people to have their say. And it was a really dark time, but a very necessary time as we revamped the tone of our program.
Carrie, are you optimistic or bullish on the idea of Christians having greater influence in academic medicine, of making a more meaningful contribution in the years ahead to the flourishing of academic medicine?
Oh, I think absolutely. Because I think people are questioning and they want, we're coming back to recognizing that technology and really faster, better drugs and such hasn't solved the problems, and people are looking for answers. And as I was standing up there in front of these healthcare executives the other day and talking about things like
may your conversation be seasoned with grace, and, and different things. That's biblical wisdom. The healthcare system needs some basic biblical wisdom about respect for persons and dignity and the way we work together as a community. And so I think that we're in such a place we're more open because we need to be.
Ted, are you optimistic or pessimistic about greater Christian influence in your field?
I think I'm realistic. I'm involved in a project at Yale, which is a massive and overwhelming project, looking at the 6 great faith traditions around the world, so you can figure out what they are. Christianity is one of them, and what their practical wisdom for management is. So we're doing conference in each of those 6 faith traditions around the world with practitioners and the leading academics, because the global economy is actually asking this question. And the reservoir, or the importance of those spiritual traditions, needs to be tapped. Christianity, I think, has a lot to add, but so do these other faiths. We're going to bring them together at Yale in 2013 to have a coordinated conversation. So I'm optimistic about the possibilities. I want to be realistic about the results.
Fran, how about you? Are you optimistic about greater gospel-centered influence in business?
I think I'm optimistic from the standpoint of what I've seen with, especially the church that my wife and I and our kids are involved in. There's a lot of young professionals that really seem to be coming back to a faith. And when I see what they're able to accomplish in the workforce, I think there is a lot of reason to be optimistic. I think with what we've seen over the last several years, with virtually every segment of every market collapsing, you can look back and say that apparently just pure capitalism and greed and these just don't work all the time. And there is something else that needs to be in our lives that's that steadying influence. And so I believe there's an opportunity for the Christians in the workforce to be able to come back and say, there are going to be ups and downs throughout the rest of your career, and if we can be part of that, bringing Christ into the workplace, I think there is some definite upside to that.
Fran, I appreciated what you shared about early in your career when you realized you were working really long hours. How do you bridle workaholism in your life today?
I think I just call it by a different name sometimes. I spend my days working with nonprofits. I head up a nonprofit practice in the firm. So when I come home at the end of the day, I do what anyone would do. I volunteer on 4 boards. So, so I'm not working anymore. So I guess I can say I'm not a workaholic at night, but I'm still doing what, kind of in my field. But I think really what happened for me was it got to a point where when I became a leader in my firm, I really had to make a decision. Was I going to be someone that was there all the time, or should I be a partner that said, you know what, I'm a partner and I know what's important in life as well. And so I wanted to be an example to the staff that were working for me. And so I did try to make a definite change over my career to attend as many games of my kids as I could. You can't make everything, and sometimes we set the bar too high for ourselves. But I did try to do a lot. I was involved. Fortunately, I was very involved in their school as a board member, so that allowed me the opportunity to spend a lot of time with them during the day, but kind of in a capacity as a board member. And so, I think over time I just realized what truly was important, and was able to, kind of cut back on the hours, not necessarily in total, but really picking and choosing where they would occur.
Ted, I'm curious. I think you're my only friend who's been nominated for an Emmy. So I'm curious, what keeps you grounded in the midst of getting accolades and recognitions in lots of different parts of life? What keeps you humble, and what keeps you grounded?
Probably my close relationship with my 3 sons and daughter, who realize that I put my pants on at one leg at a time, and I'm not a perfect person and have all kinds of mistakes, and warts. So that kicks back at you.
Family.
Yeah.
Carrie, how about you? What keeps you grounded?
I think anybody who's tried to raise 3 very active sons, by definition, has to be grounded. I think parenting challenges you so much. I think marriage is challenging. I think just, being a good friend. I think as I step back and try to examine where I'm at, I think all of those just different influences and where you spend your time really kind of remind you who you are, and I think that's what keeps you grounded. Is I'm listening to your kids and realizing their view of you and who you want to be for them, and it reminds you. It's very humbling, I think, to parent.
Well, as you can tell, we have some great examples of individuals who have come to Gordon and who continue to provide inspiration for all of us to the next generation. Faithful leadership for the common good. Please join me in thanking our panelists for great